Good morning, everybody, and a very early morning for those of you on the West Coast. Welcome to Session 189, Canadian Engagement in the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. I'm Paul Snelgrove. I'm the Departmental Advisor to Fisheries and Oceans Canada. I'm a Professor of Ocean Sciences and Biology at Memorial University. I'm the Network Director of the Canadian Healthy Oceans Network and Associate Scientific Director of the Ocean Frontier Institute. But I'm also a biological oceanographer with expertise in seafloor ecology and involved in the decade in connection with all of the different hats that I wear. If we could put up the first slide, please. So the United Nations has proclaimed 2021 to 2030 the decade of ocean science for sustainable development to support efforts to reverse the cycle of decline in ocean health and gather ocean stakeholders worldwide behind a common framework that will ensure ocean science can fully support countries in creating improved conditions for sustainable development of the ocean. That's a quote. The tagline for this effort, the ocean we need for the future that we want. Tasked by the UN General Assembly, the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, the IOC, of UNESCO, has been coordinating the decade's preparatory process in order to mobilize ocean stakeholders worldwide behind a common framework that will ensure ocean science can fully support the achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The precise wording of this initiative merits comment. It is not a decade for ocean science, but rather a decade for ocean science to support sustainable development. Next slide, please. Now, many of you will know of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. If you can give me just 1 second, my screen has just messed up. Right. Of these 17 Sustainable Development Goals, number 14 states to conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. The IOC will establish oversight committees to coordinate decade activities, but they will not provide major funding for the work. This means that scientists and other ocean stakeholders must work together to align existing and new activities, often on a national scale, with decade efforts around the world, keeping in mind the closely linked goals of capacity building and knowledge mobilization. Next slide, please. Canada has played an active role throughout the preparatory phase, including hosting the International Workshop on the North Atlantic and participating in numerous other preparatory meetings around the world. The recent throne speech also highlighted the importance of a sustainable blue economy. Canada remains committed to supporting the Ocean Decade, so as its launch approaches, what can Canada do as a developed nation with the longest coastline in the world and 3 of 4 borders defined by ocean basins? What considerations should be at the forefront of our minds as we prepare for the decade? Today, we bring together a panel of diverse experts on ocean issues to discuss what Canada as a country could, and perhaps should, bring to the table. Could we roll the video now, please?
Los océanos son poco conocidos frente a lo que ellos significan para la humanidad.
The oceans dictate our future weather and also our long-term climate. It's half the oxygen we breathe and much of the protein that we consume.
Now the ocean is under threat. It faces severe pollution and over-exploitation.
And for the UN to recognize this and say, we have to understand this great piece of the globe that affects us is profoundly important.
We're facing many challenges, so we do all need to come together if we want to see a healthy, resilient, and productive ocean taking us into the future.
The Decade of Ocean Sciences for Sustainable Development is the only opportunity we have to make sure that people continue to benefit from oceans while improving its ecological health.
A fantastic opportunity to really bring together science, decision-making and society.
Как можно шире распространить знания о Мировом океане.
Y que ese entendimiento ayude en tomar unas decisiones más sabias.
For the whole of humanity, for a sustainable development also after 2030.
Learn the ocean, protect the ocean, live with the ocean. That's it.
By the end of 2030, we should have very specific measurable outputs.
And be able to tackle some really complex questions such as quantifying and mitigating cumulative impacts on our oceans.
And what we really need to do now is to use science in the context of a problem-solving approach.
So the decade is about leaving no one behind when it comes to the ocean.
The main target is to concentrate on the most vulnerable countries in the world.
And the ability to use science and technology in decision making, especially for the small island developing states.
To reduce difference between the rich and the poor.
So that everybody has the capacity of obtaining samples and knowledge from the ocean.
وتكون في فرصة لتطبيق الابتكار في العلوم المحيطات في خلال هذه العشر سنوات.
The decade to me represents a platform and a commitment by the global world for capacity development.
Para que esa década de los océanos en realidad marque una diferencia.
So for me, the decade gives that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really take that message forward, to consult with people around me, to showcase what ocean science can do for the world. And I'm sure we're going to have so many people wanting to be part of that decade.
We can participate in saving the ocean for the next generation to come. And I'm happy to be part of that.
It's not going to be easy, it's not going to be quick, but I think if we have a sound basis in scientific information and the technological tools, we'll be able to make progress much more quickly.
I don't want my grandson to be looking back at me when I'm gone and remembering that I wish he tried a little harder. I want to try really hard right now, and we owe it to the next generation and the generation after that.
All right, wonderful. I hope you're all able to hear that. I was not, but the text was below it, but they said it much better than I could. So let's do a quick poll now. So if we could put up that first poll, the question is, to what extent should the Canadian ocean community engage in the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development? There are 4 possible answers there. I'm not going to read them for you, but read them carefully because they are quite distinct, but you have to read them carefully to fully appreciate them. And I'll give you 30 seconds now to enter your answer on the poll. Okay, we have the results of the poll. And I'm trying to read it. It's very small on my screen. Let me enlarge that, see if that helps. So it looks like most people are in favor of engaging to the full extent possible, and almost nobody feels it should be a low priority. So that's good news. So thank you all for participating. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our panel members who will take us through this discussion. So first of all, Philippe Archambault is a good friend of mine, a professor in the Department of Biology at Université Laval in Quebec City. He is co-scientific director of the Canadian Network of Centres of Excellence ArcticNet, which is funding over 168 researchers with over 430 HQP, highly qualified personnel, distributed in 67 Canadian universities and governmental departments. Making ArcticNet a fully pan-Canadian network, Phil is a researcher who strives to link fundamental marine biodiversity to theoretical research on global change and its effect on ecosystem functioning to applied science and policymaking. His well-known reputation in research network leadership is based on his headship of different national and international initiatives, such as chairman of the 4th World Conference on Marine Biodiversity and the annual Scientific ArcticNet meeting, which is the largest conference on the Arctic in America. Our second panelist will be Catherine Lambert Koizumi. Catherine trained out west and in the Arctic, integrating Indigenous ecological knowledge and studies on predator-prey interactions. In 2012, she became the executive director of the Mi'kmaq Maliseet Aboriginal Fisheries Management Association, MMAFMA. Under her leadership, the growing organization carries out research projects on fisheries and aquaculture, marine protected areas, Indigenous ecological knowledge, maritime safety training, species at risk, and coastal restoration. Catherine also actively participates in several national and international committees on ocean research, collaborative management, and Indigenous engagement. Eric Siegel is a physical oceanographer and has broad experience working with ocean technology companies and collaborating with scientists to develop new products and new applications. He is now the executive in residence at Canada's Ocean Startup Project, advising ocean tech companies on product development and growth with an aim to make Canada the best place in the world to start and grow an ocean company. Glithero is an educator and social science researcher specializing in ocean, climate, and sustainability learning and civic engagement. Since 2018, in her role as National Coordinator of the Canadian Ocean Literacy Coalition, Diz has been leading a Canada-wide collaborative research and engagement process to co-develop a national ocean strategy for Canada to be launched in early 2021. And then Sonia Batten, who brings a background as a biological oceanographer, studies plankton dynamics and their role in marine food webs. With exceptional timing, she chose to apply for a new position late last year, and in April moved to the North Pacific Marine Science Organization, or PICES, as its executive secretary. PICES is an intergovernmental science organization that seeks to advance knowledge and understanding of the ecosystem of the North Pacific through collaboration and cooperation. So on that note, I will turn it over to Phil. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for this invitation. Canada has a long history of ocean science, like Paul just mentioned, and we also are surrounded by 3 oceans. Canada is also the longest coastline of the world. And just as a quick fact, 10% of the coastline of the world are in the Canadian Arctic. Next slide, please. So these 2 figures highlight the position of Canada in ocean research output in the 25 leading countries in ocean science between 2003 and 2011. On the figure on the left, the right dot represents Canada. The size of the circle represents the number of publications, and when you are located in the top right corner, this means that Canada ocean science has a high impact in research, and that research is highly specialized. More precisely, Canada was ranked on the table in the middle. If you can see the totally right column, Canada was ranked 2nd on the 25 country in Arctic Ocean research, and we were ranked in general as 7 in the first column in red. So all this information were published in 2013 in the Canadian, or in the Council of the Canadian Academy. Next slide, please. To reach this position, it was a long way. And you see here this timeline where you have the first major vessel, the Hudson, in 1962, and this timeline up to the ocean decade. And as you can see, there's an increase of number of little logo, and I will explain why. So Canada reached this position, the 7th position out of 25, because they invest in major infrastructure. We can think about the research icebreaker Amundsen in 2003. It's also Canada invests quite a lot in the creation of network. And all these one on the right, all these logo are ocean type network, I would say. And this investment was through grant agencies such as the Strategic Network of the Natural Science and Engineer Research Council of Canada, also called NSERC, or the Network of Center of Excellence, also called NCE. This one will sadly stop functioning in 3-4 years. All these networks are based on multi and interdisciplinary science. And even some of these networks are also transdisciplinary. They are not only bridging scientific discipline, but also academic, federal and provincial department, and private sector. All these networks federate the research. However, in the same report I mentioned of the Canadian Council of Academy, they highlight that on the 25 countries they look at the data, Canada was the country with the lowest increase in investment in ocean science. And they were quite, I would say, concerned then if we're not increasing our investment in ocean science, Canada may lack some leading role like the 7th position we have so far. Next slide, please. Just to remind you on the graph, you see that in 2007 was the iPhone. So just to put you in context, then we invest quite a lot in the last 20 years. This is why we're so nicely ranked at the international level. So all these networks and the research performed are somehow multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, or even transdisciplinary. I can think of a project that started with the food safety and security for community in Nunavut or Nunavik, where basic science, such how many mussel you can find on the coast or clam you can find on the coast each year, And they link that, so some of these are linked that to the food security and safety and even health issue of the northern communities. To answer complex question, so you can be in all these different multi-inter or transdisciplinary, but you need to also converge the research. This is what the graph on the left try to show. So knowledge from different sector, from the private, academia, government, and also traditional knowledge. And if you can move this little cross, it's a 3D I was trying to make. So that means you need to converge every type of discipline with different sector. Next slide, please. One of the network that are combining all type of knowledge, sector, and discipline to 3 different programs is ArcticNet. First, ArcticNet did the core program, financing 34 projects. There's also the satellite program, which is the international one, and the recently new one called the North by North. North by North program, it's magnified the urgent need to support Northern research led by Northern people and for them. Over the year, so 16 years exactly, ArcticNet federates 67 university and government departments to work together and train the future generation with more than 2,600 highly qualified personnel or students, and engage more than 1,000 Inuit or Northerner in different research projects. ArcticNet published more than 10,000 research reports at that time, including scientific paper. All this can be used through policy or decision maker. Next slide, please. These results could be synthesized in different formats, such as the IRIS report of ArcticNet, which is represented by the center. All this research is it's published in an integrative way that could be used to inform policy. Furthermore, these information could be presented in different formats, all through a web portal which can be updated regularly. So that means you have the up-to-date information all the time. You have also the report in different format. It could be some little video or science brief that could be used and viewed by a large type of audience, such as decision makers, student in class, the general public, First Nation, Inuit, and all these information on crucial ocean question at local, national, and global scale. The Decade of the Ocean is a very good opportunity for Canada to mobilize the ocean science community and ensure that Canada stays in the leading group for the benefit of Canadians and also for our planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. We do actually, if we'd like to take a question or two, people can type them into the chat window. If we don't get to it right after the speaker, we will have time, obviously, at the end of the session, during which we can have more questions. I'm not seeing anything in there just yet. So let's move on, but again, we'll come back to Phil when we get to the group discussion at the end. So Catherine, shall we pass it over to you?
Perfect. Yes. Okay. So hi everyone. Thank you for. I'm glad to be sitting with everyone on the panel today. So today I was invited to discuss how to engage Indigenous partners in the decade of ocean. So I'll talk about some opportunities and challenges that we have to consider into increasing the Indigenous participation in the decade. So I'll switch to the next slide. Okay. So first, I will just, well, there's a map of Canada. As you all know, we have 3 coastlines of ocean from the Pacific, the Arctic to the Atlantic. There's a red square here where I show the 3 communities we are serving at MMAFMA, so the Mi'kmaq Maliseet Aboriginal Fisheries Management Association. So you have the Mi'kmaq of Gaspé on the Gaspé Peninsula, the Mi'kmaq Nations of Gaspé, and also the Wolastoqiyik Wassabigook First Nation, who were previously known as the Première Nation Maliseet de Vigier. And so they are coastal First Nations. We have in the Maritimes alone 34 Mi'kmaq and Maliseet communities, but we have the Inus, we have the Inuit, and all over the countries there are several First Nations who are have closely linked with the ocean since immemorial times. So they have depended on, and they depend and still do from the ocean for food, social and ceremonial purposes. So this is just to give you a context. And in the so from immemorial times, the First Nations have relied on oceans, but we know that since the colonization in the last 200 years, they've lost a lot of access to the ocean. But in the last 30 years, there've been a lot of development, and I'll just highlight some of the major historical, I guess, facts of Canada in our context to make you better understand how Indigenous have been more engaged in the ocean management and conservation in the last 30 years. We start with the Supreme Court decision of Sparrow in 1990. So this decision recognized the right of First Nation in the Constitution to have access to fisheries for food, social, and ceremonial reasons. 10 years later, we've had the Supreme Court Marshall judgment, and the Marshall case outlined the right of First Nation of the Mi'kmaq and the Maliseet, but that has been extended to several other nations afterwards, to access to fisheries for a moderate livelihood. So this referred to the access of First Nation for commercial purposes, so not just for their own livelihood, not just for their own food, but also for to obtain a moderate livelihood from the sale of fish. And in the following years, the federal government, to be consistent with those Supreme Court judgments, we've had several programs that have emerged to help assist Indigenous capacity development, training, and diversification of their fisheries and aquaculture. And some of these programs, I put the acronyms there, but there's the AROM program, so it's the Aboriginal Aquatic Resources and Ocean Management. Also, we have more regional initiatives like the ACFI, that's the Atlantic Integrated Commercial Fisheries Initiative, the PICFI, that's the Pacific Indigenous Commercial Fisheries Initiative. We have the NICFI, which is the northern counterpart of that program. There are several programs that have emerged to give some tools and capacity to increase the training, also the equipment, the access to boat and fishing gear for the First Nations to be able to regain their access to the oceans. In 2016, there also was a major step when Canada adopted the Declaration of Rights on Indigenous People of the United Nations that underlies the principle of a free, prior, and informed consent of First Nations. And it also, I won't go into the details here, but this was a major recognition of the importance of consulting and also integrating and collaborating with First Nations when we are developing oceans or managing oceans. And following that, recently in 2019, there's been some modification of legislations, for instance, the Fisheries Act, to integrate the Indigenous knowledge into one of the perspective and knowledge that we have about oceans. So now the scientists, legislators needs to consult and also consider the Indigenous knowledge into the decisions that are made about ocean management and conservation. And so one example of that was there's here in the Atlantic, the two-eyed seeing proposition of Albert Marshall. Is an elder from communities in the Maritimes, but that is just to state the point that we need to see from two eyes, like there's the scientific, like the Western eye, and also the Indigenous knowledge eye. So we need to be able to take knowledge from all perspectives and put consideration into the knowledge that was held and passed down between the generations of indigenous people in regards to the ocean, because the indigenous knowledge is often complementary and based on a more holistic and sometimes practical point of view. And again, I will not go into the details here, but it's been increasingly recognized that it's very important to do that. And I'll go to the next slide. So we made a humongous progress in the last 30 years. And now indigenous engagement is being recognized as an important step to better manage in the ocean and for a sustainable also natural resources management of ocean and terrestrial resources. And some of the steps that are recommended to do that is first to review the existing indigenous protocols. We all know that every First Nations is different and that they may have their own view about how data is shared and how it is stored and how they want to collaborate. So the first step is to really make an overview of what are the existing protocols, and also to make sure we do due notification and information. So to connect with the First Nations and notify them of initiatives in science, in industry, in education, and inform them about the different views. And to go further, the next step after information is to listen and exchange with them what are their preoccupations, their issues concerning what we're proposing to do. And then one step further is the collaboration and partnership. Us at MAFMA, we are a nonprofit organization, and we do a lot of collaboration and partnership with university researchers and government to be a part and a member of the various research initiatives. And I really think that's the way to do. And in Canada right now, we have almost 35 ARAMS group like we are doing. So there's there's a lot of collaborations going on in science that is being collected by indigenous groups. And then we have to share that knowledge and make it grow and shine. So we need opportunities for the First Nations to be able to share their knowledge with peer-reviewed publications, but also conferences, and to give them a platform in the decade, I think, of oceans to be able to share that knowledge and the science that they are collecting with traditional and also more modern and Western ways to collect data about the ocean. And finally, well, valuation, respect, and recognition, I think, are the peak of the pyramid that we can value each other's contribution to the decade and make sure that we recognize the science that's been collected by the indigenous groups. So to conclude, I made a list of some opportunities and challenges that I think are relevant to highlight in regard with the decade. The good news in Canada is that right now we have several funding programs, and the legislation has been changed to really promote the participation of First Nations into oceans management and research. And I think that's a very positive news. If we look at some insert programs, now the researchers are asked often to partner with First Nation. There's some valued there's a value that is being recognized about partnership with First Nations. So that is very good for the indigenous groups across the country. And another good news is that we have a growing capacities, like in with all the programs that have been put in places. There are several First Nations now that have their very talented biologists or technicians, or even they can have archaeologists. So there are many resources that are working in the First Nations organizations now that are, I think the science community should try to connect with them to make even greater partnerships in research. There are some growing research opportunities, and also the sharing of indigenous ecological knowledge has been valued more and more, and there are even some groups that are willing to share it, and I think that is similar to open data. It can really help us to better understand the value of oceans and the contributions of various traditions or conceptions of nature for the future conservation of the ocean. We have an atlas here at AGAM, for example, that is online, and we can in the West also some communities have put some their data open to share. So that is very unique, and I think we need to take advantage of that. In terms of water and fisheries management, the First Nations have been increasingly also involved into the management cycle of fisheries of the Department of Fisheries and Ocean. And we do some partnership, and also so that's very positive. And in terms of fisheries and aquaculture, because of a growing commercial enterprise of several like Mi'kmaq, Wolastoqey, and Cree, and in the West Coast, the Ida, and many First Nations across the country, they diversified their fisheries and aquaculture. Now, just in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, the 25% of the northern shrimp is being harvested by First Nations. And they really diversified their aquaculture and the fisheries. So they're present. The indigenous fisheries sector is quite strong now in Canada. So these are great opportunities. And in terms of partnership and reconciliation, we can see there's more talk, more groups, more working groups with First Nations. So these are really good news for the engagement of Indigenous partners in the decade and in the management of oceans. There's still some remaining challenges, however, because usually First Nations are small communities. They're limited in time, resources, and human power. So sometimes there's an overabundance of opportunities. And in our situation, and I know it's the same for several other groups across the country, we are limited in what we can accept because of a lack of human power and time. There may also be some persisting prejudices, although these tend to be small, like better, less and less with years. And in terms of politics, of course, we still have to be careful. But overall, I think the decade looks bright ahead of us, and I think Indigenous groups can be made participate in the decade and contribute to the goals of the decade. So I'm very hopeful about that, because I think the context is very good right now for this to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. We actually do have a question for you already. Someone is interested in Catherine's advice on consultation fatigue and burden on First Nations groups. Would you care to comment on that?
Yes, so this is related to the, yes, so really this is related to the over, I guess, the limited time and human power in each community. And that is a fact that we have to be really careful about. It's the First Nations are being solicited with all around the spheres of management of the ocean, but also for natural resources, for laws, for consultations on species at risk, and on pretty much everything now, because as part of the legislation, they have to be consulted. So there is indeed a consultation fatigue. There are some funds sometimes that can be used to hire new people, but in small communities and in rural environments, we have to know that it's not always easy to recruit the proper people and the competent people, and it may take some time to train the new people. So that's really a challenge, and it's one of the greatest challenge. It's I think with time we will be able to have good team and enough resources to respond, but sometimes the delays are very tight, and it really, I think it's a real challenge.
Great, thank you. We do have another question for you, Catherine, but I'm going to hold it until the end, if that's all right, and suggest we pass the baton to Eric to talk a little bit about technology and industry.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm happy to speak here. My name's Eric Siegel. I'm the executive in residence at the Ocean Startup Project. And Ocean Startup Project is Canada's effort to try to make Canada the best place in the world to start and grow an ocean technology company. I'll be speaking about two things. One is a bit how we're trying to work to create sustainable companies, and a little bit at the end, some guidance for how I've seen science best collaborate with industry. So we've broken the ocean sector broadly into 5 different classifications for where the biggest markets are. That's fisheries and aquaculture, marine bioscience and resources, shipping and transportation, energy, and that's both renewable energy but also extractive energy, and naval and defense. But of course, many of you are working in another category, which really is pure science and research, because this is the Science Policy Conference. And that is an important section. It's one that we're not addressing directly because it's a little bit smaller than some of these other very, very large global markets, but we do discuss it in terms of some of these cross-cutting technologies that we think will impact all of these sectors. So we're looking at these enabling technologies that are changing rapidly and creating a lot of opportunity for new companies, and with a focus in sustainability. So data, this is a very large word, but this includes analytics and AI, machine learning, machine vision, and just all aspects of data. Robotics, we hear about this a lot, and of course robotics are influencing lots of these different sectors. Sensors, we all know about sensors, and we all know that sensors are required to do any kind of science and to contribute to all these sectors, and new materials. And so we're looking at how these 4 enabling technologies will support and enable new companies within the various sectors, but we're also trying to push a light of sustainability across all of these. And I'll get to that in a minute about why sustainability is important across these sectors. But you're already familiar with a bunch of these companies. So these are all ocean tech companies in Canada, and you can see that they play in either very specific enabling technologies across many sectors. For example, the company called Deep Tracker, based in Ontario, is a robotics company, and they focus in many sectors. And in the other way, there's one company called Ultra, a large defense company, and they focus in data, robotics, and sensors, but they're very, very focused into one sector. And then, of course, there are some companies such as Acadian Sea Plants, for example, that is very narrow and deep. They work on marine bioproducts and different materials in that one sector. So we're looking at how technologies and sectors play together. And the concept is trying to create more companies with an ocean sustainability lens. And so there's sort of an old business model, which is that successful companies do good for the ocean through philanthropic or corporate sustainability responsibility and donation. So this would be some very, very large companies and some very wealthy owners that then try to contribute back to the oceans. And so, for example, Schmidt Ocean Institute on the west coast of the US and Rev Ocean in Norway are 2 of these companies. They have a lot of money through normal business practices, and now they're contributing back into the ocean through some of their programs. And those are very good, but we're trying to develop a new model, which is that you can actually doing good for the ocean can also be good for business. So this is a more sustainable model from a revenue point of view, but it also is actually impacting the ocean in a beneficial way is good for business, which means it's a good business model as well. And I'll speak about a couple of those example companies that we're working with. But first, I'll tell you a little bit about what the Ocean Startup Project is doing to try to enable the shift to ocean sustainability. We're working broadly in 3 different categories, which we define as inspire, initiate, and invest. And this is sort of the cycle of how companies go from an idea into a large and scaling company. So inspire, we focus on at least 2 things. One is ideation workshops and this lab to market program. The ideation workshops is where we take industries of those different 5 sectors and leaders from around the world to talk about what are the real big industry challenges? What kind of problems do industries in the ocean sector need to solve, and how can we solve them? So that's creating the business opportunities through these ideation workshops. And then at the very base of the ideation is this program called Lab to Market, which is a very structured 6-week program to try to help university researchers, so those are typically grad students, and research faculty, how they can understand what technology they have and give them a couple ideas of how they can commercialize it. So it helps them understand the problem, helps them speak to customers, helps them think about how do we spin this out and commercialize it to get things moving. The next stage is what we call initiate, and this is where Ocean Startup Project provides some funding to generally early stage startup companies to try to help advance them into a more sustainable business. And we provide some mentorship along the way. And there are many mentorship components of mentorship problem, but it's not just funding, we also try to help them move. And then the last section is invest. And this is through a program called CDL, Creative Destruction Labs, which many of you might know. It's been running in Canada and now around the world for many years. And we've created an oceans-focused stream. We have 20 companies in the CDL Oceans cohort now, and they are companies that are being linked to very experienced mentors, and sometimes some investment comes organically through those meetings. But we're also working on collecting a whole bunch of impact investing people. So this is a really exciting place where the market's going for venture capital, where people don't just want to invest in profitable companies, but they want to invest in companies that are making a real difference. And this is where a bunch of ocean startups in the space are getting investment through people that really want to see companies make a difference in the world, and specifically for the oceans. So as we said, there are a couple companies that are doing this, where they're trying to have a successful business by doing good for the oceans. And so one company we're seeing is rolling out a new type of paint to reduce biofouling, but it's a non-copper-based paint. It doesn't harm the environment, doesn't kill things by putting poison into the water. It uses actually some marine bioproducts developed from lobster shells. And so this improves the local ecosystem health because you're not dumping copper, there's no copper dust from the paint. It also, of course, reduces the friction for these large commercial vessels because it reduces biofouling. So it reduces friction, it saves fuel, reduces greenhouse gases. And because it's healthy for the environment, it's doing good for everyone, while hopefully a successful company. Another example is a microbial fuel cell for aquaculture. This is something that goes below coastal and offshore aquaculture pens. It can improve the sediment quality below the pen. One thing this does right away is improve community acceptance. The residents aren't necessarily as opposed to putting aquaculture pens outside their backyard because it improves the environmental quality, and it makes aquaculture more efficient. Aquaculture now doesn't need to let their pens lay fallow for a large portion of time because the sediment below isn't as impacted. So this is very good for aquaculture companies, good for the environment, and therefore it's a good business model. And then another one is electrifying commercial vessels. So this is taking commercial vessels that are typically running on gasoline or diesel and making them electric, so with batteries and electric engines. This, of course, improves efficiency and saves the cost of fuel. Of course, you still have to provide electricity to power it, but electricity prices are very, very stable, and they don't go up and down like gasoline and diesel prices. Electric engines always reduce noise, which is good for the operators, but also for the marine life. And some of these commercial vessels are involved in tourism, and this has a boost of actually increasing the value of the tourism because tourists want to be part of electric tour boats where they can understand and appreciate all these value propositions. So again, this is a nice win-win-win where it's good for the environment and it's good for business. Last little bit is just some thoughts about how science can collaborate with industry and a couple strategies to optimize your outcome as scientists. And it sort of depends on which size company you're working with. Well, for example, I would say if you've got a good idea and you're developing some interesting technology or research, create a startup from your own research. That's what we're here to help you with. The next decade really will provide some outstanding opportunities. And so try to develop your own products and services instead of depending upon a different company to do that for you. But most of you are working with SMEs, small to medium-sized enterprises, which are funded primarily by sales to yourself, to other researchers and scientists. And so my guidance there is really create frequent dialogue with these industries that you're speaking with. Talk to the salespeople, talk to the presidents, help them understand what you're trying to do, what you need, tell them what your challenges are, let them know what you require to do your science and how you're able to fund it through the different grants and collaborations you're writing. The scientists generally depend upon industry, whether it's to buy the pipettes and chemicals to do lab work, whether it's to buy the duct tape and PVC to make frames for surveys, or whether it's to buy the scientific sensors and instruments you're using for measurement. You rely on industry, and of course they rely on you. So there's this mutual respect, which is really nice. And engage in partnerships. Canada has so many ways to engage industry in partnerships. The Ocean Supercluster is a 5-year project, which is about midway through. So there's still plenty of years to engage through supercluster projects. And then NSERC has a number of programs, Engage Grant, Alliance Grant, and many other things where it makes it really attractive for industry and researchers to engage. And finally, if you're working with some very, very large companies, there are some companies that we just have to acknowledge are really not focused on ocean science. They're focused on some of these other sectors like defense or shipping or aquaculture. And as much as you can make a really good point that your work is important, they just won't be able to focus on ocean science. And so I think in that case, it's important to use what they provide off the shelf and try to understand how you can accomplish your goals, or even change your scientific methods if required to accomplish your goals using some of the existing products, services, data, or platform that they already provide. Okay, thanks for the time here.
All right, thank you, Eric. Appreciate your comments. I don't see anything in the bar specifically directed at you, but I will ask you a question myself. Do you have any thoughts on the coordination challenge? So there are lots of industries out there, some just getting started and others that have been around for a while. So when we think of the context of the decade, how can we try to make sense of that and get some sort of coordinated effort from industry and technology?
Yeah, so that's a good question. What we're trying to do at the moment is coordinate some things, as I said, by bringing different industry experts from around the world, from all these different sectors together to really identify what some of the biggest challenges are. I should mention that we're doing a series in Canada of these webinars and networking sessions starting January. They'll run January, February, and March, where we're bringing together industry people from around the world to talk about these challenges. The very first one we're doing is actually a focus on sustainability, ocean sustainability. And in that one, we're having Canadian experts from industry from these 5 sectors. That's fishing and aquaculture, shipping, defense, marine bioproducts, and energy, to talk about sustainability concerns and issues and opportunities within those markets. And I think that might be a good place to have other people from this conference and from around the world weigh in, participate, communicate, and talk about what sustainability questions and concerns they have and how industry can address that either through existing companies or new ventures.
Great, thank you. The other thing that comes to mind there is Ocean Supercluster. Of course, that's a particular group of people, but nonetheless another opportunity in addition to the one you suggest. All right, so let's pass the baton to Diz Glithero, and I will say that our audience is perhaps starting to figure out that what we're proposing here are some ideas of how Canada could contribute. And so ocean literacy is obviously one of those possibilities. So Diz, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Paul, and good morning to my fellow panelists and all conference participants joining us today. It's great to be here. I'm joining you from Chelsea, Quebec, on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. So I've been invited to discuss the ways ocean literacy, the role it could play in advancing this decade outcomes. And perhaps before jumping to that, it'd be helpful to explore, and to our tech friend, it's currently on the last slide. If there's a possibility to bring it up to the first slide, that would be great. Sorry, okay, first slide is what is ocean literacy? Maybe it's just what's appearing on my screen is the last one. So I'd like to be on the slide that reads, what is ocean literacy? Thank you.
I think, Diz, that's right. You're not seeing the live feed the way the rest of us are, although I'm still waiting to see the ocean literacy one.
Okay, I'll just jump in and trust it's going. But yeah, it's helpful. Ocean literacy, it's one of those terms that it can be quite nebulous or abstract for many people. It has its roots in the early 2000s, work done in the United States, specifically with ocean science community, working with marine educators to specifically try and get more ocean science knowledge into the national kindergarten to grade 12 curriculum in the United States. So the term that was established and came with the 7 ocean literacy principles and the framework, that was very much a specific agenda to ocean science knowledge mobilization across a young generation in the US. And the definition used at that time that's widely accepted internationally is an understanding of the ocean's influence on you and your influence on the ocean. Since that time, over the past 10 to 15 years, a lot of that, foundational work done in the US has been taken up in different ways by different international communities. And the definition has broadened quite a bit, which I think is useful. And most recently, IOC UNESCO, in lead up to the decade, has defined it more broadly as a civic relationship with the ocean. And how do we go about cultivating that civic relationship? So it implies more action, more civic participation, more of an ethic of care, all of which are good. In terms of a Canadian context, I think it's just worth mentioning, ocean literacy is certainly an imperfect term. For Indigenous people in Canada, it's a modern term and intervention for something that's always been known. I think for Francophone Canadians, it's a clunky term. There's no awkward, or there's no direct translation of it. So it just, it's awkward to work with. And I think for the 30+ million Canadians who live inland, away from Canada's longest coastline, it's not immediately inclusive. And so for all these reasons, it's a challenging term, but I think it's important for Canada to continue using it because of the international momentum. Next slide, please. And if we keep in mind that fundamentally, when kind of stripped down, ocean literacy is really about our relationship with the ocean. And so in 2018, the Canadian Ocean Literacy Coalition was established, and not as a legal entity, but rather as a cluster of existing organizations coming together to better understand and advance ocean literacy in Canada. Although there's been a lot of great work happening over the past couple of decades around ocean literacy in Canada, it's very fragmented and siloed from one another. So that was identified, and the need for some kind of convening entity to bring us together, to share ideas, to better understand, the regional perceptions and approaches to ocean literacy, and to help bring some common language and coordinated actions together. And so the main project of the coalition over the last 2 years has been to lead a national conversation through a research initiative to explore our civic relationship with the ocean in Canada. And so we had 5 regions: Inuit Nunangat, Atlantic, Pacific, St. Lawrence, and inland Canada, and across 9 different sectors to explore this relationship through a mixed methods approach. And we were certainly overwhelmed. I mean, the participation was fantastic. Over 3,000 Canadians, over 400 organizations, identifying strengths, barriers, gaps. And those reports were released in June. They can be found on the coalition website. And since that time, we've been then synthesizing all the regional recommendations, as well as the clearly identified national common priorities that were identified across the 5 regions. And you can see some of them there, but some are very specific. They are about, there's a need for more ocean education in the provincial and territorial curriculum. There's things like enhancing knowledge mobilization, knowledge sharing through communication, arts, multimedia, what have you. And then there's broader kind of cross-cutting, the essential need for a commitment to equity and justice and inclusion across all this work, to recognize and support Indigenous leadership across this work. So you can see it's a mix of both specific and cross-cutting. Next slide, please. And, as we look towards launching of the national strategy, and Canada will be the first country with a national ocean literacy strategy, and early in the new year we'll be launching that. The question often asked is, who is the strategy for, and who more broadly is responsible for advancing ocean literacy? And I think the one key misconception we all need to shatter is that and ocean literacy, or any literacy for that matter, tends to get boxed within the domain of education and youth. And I think it's really essential that we all recognize that all sectors play a key role in contributing into advancing ocean literacy. You know, any actions within any sector that are working towards deepening ocean knowledge, ocean understanding, that is working to cultivate, stronger values and ethic of care, or who are creating spaces for more inclusive participation and engagement of citizens, Canadians or global, in decision-making, in co-management and monitoring and all the various works, and making data sharing, more open and access to all. All these things contribute to elevating a citizenry that can engage more meaningfully and to contribute more towards the ensuring future health of our ocean, and in turn, our own health and well-being. And so just a few couple examples. I mean, clearly within the science and academic realm, so much of what the decade is focusing on, certainly teaming up scientists who are experts. And when I think of ocean science, I'm also thinking too, and there's multiple ways of knowing about the ocean. So Indigenous knowledge experts, local place-based vernacular knowledge, to braid those different knowledge systems together and to team up with educators. Okay, just a thumbs up, Paul, if you can hear me okay. It looks like we are back live. All right, great to be back, and I'm not sure what happened, but here we are gathered again. I'll try and pick up where I left off, and just a couple things speaking about the different ways that we can all advance. I mean, a few examples, even within industry, and we look at the growing and emerging sustainable blue economy, one of the main things there is to ensure that the opportunities that are going to emerge are so well communicated and promoted to all Canadians, young Canadians, and to as diverse, population of Canadians as possible in order to be able to access that. We know there's a career literacy gap in Canada around opportunities within the marine. So to be able to really leverage that, I think is, that's a great way to advance ocean literacy. I think also too, when we look at reimagining particularly our inland cities and communities, ensuring public access to blue spaces, public swimming. I look at the Gord Downey Pier in Kingston. Looks like I'm getting cut out again, sorry, at this end. Those are all ways that we can restore that personal connection to waterways and to the ocean, and as well as allowing us to build those emotional foundations that I think are so essential to having people actually not just understand, but to really value and care, because that's what's going to drive the difference. We'll move to our next slide, please. Last one here is just looking, there's many ways I think Canada can contribute to the decade through ocean literacy lens. I mean, the fact that we have the first national strategy in place, there's a lot to share in terms of the process by which that was co-created. To build a national strategy from the bottom up generated a huge momentum and inclusive community from coast to coast to coast around better understanding, why it matters, why our connection to the ocean matters. And I think even more particular, what Canada has to offer is that in order to do this well in Canada, we had to bridge what were existing silos between water literacy efforts and ocean literacy efforts. So to date, so much has been done to kind of distinguish the difference between the two rather than to look at what unites those two bodies. And I think we're learning really well. And as our two communities in Canada come together to strengthen Canadians' connections to local waterways, knowing that for a majority of Canadians, it's through that connection that they actually reach the ocean, it is really important. And I think Canada also has an incredible opportunity in terms of its Indigenous leadership around conservation, co-management, co-monitoring, all those things. And Catherine referenced the two-eyed seeing, and there's so many things that I think Canada can really bring to the table to elevate. And the last thing I'll just draw out is when ocean literacy was recently added as the 7th kind of decade outcome, it was quite wise, I think, that they didn't name it ocean literacy, they named it kind of inspiration and engagement. And that we don't act on what we know. We can communicate science and ocean knowledge till we're all blue in the face. But at the end of the day, what moves and mobilizes citizens to act is what hits us in the heart. It's the emotional. And so we need the storytellers and the artists and the musicians and people from all walks of life to engage in the communication of why a healthy ocean for future generations is essential. And so I look forward to Canada contributing to broadening the tent, broadening the conversation, and really inspiring a global community to act. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Diz, and apologies for the glitch. Apparently it was system-wide, so it wasn't unique to just us. We do have a question for you, which is what region in Canada is leading in ocean literacy and what examples make them a leader?
Great question. I could point to examples, and it's really worth reading, not to promote the coalition's work, but to just the 5 regional reports highlight case studies and examples of very diverse ways that ocean literacy is being practiced across this country. And so even more important than reading, I'd say, the national reports is to read these 5 regional reports. But, Pacific region for sure jumps to mind because they've been, with pioneers like the Vancouver Aquarium in the sense of just, bringing Canadians into discussions around the ocean and to learn about it, and starting in the 50s. We've got so many institutes out there that have, been pioneers for decades and decades. So I think there's great examples there, but it's important, again, in the context of a discussion on ocean literacy, the most ocean literate people in Canada are Inuit and coastal First Nations. And so, when I look at the tribal journeys that happen on the West Coast every year, bringing youth and connecting them to other communities and to their culture and to their language and the place and stories of the coast, that is, the essence of ocean literacy more than any more modern kind of programming or schooling effort. And it's fundamental that Canadians look to those for leadership and guidance. But Ocean School, as an example, Dalhousie and Boris Worm and Janet Stalker, a very unique partnership between Dalhousie University, Ocean Frontier Institute, the National Film Board, and the Ingenium, the Science Museum. Those kind of innovation, cross-sectoral partnerships to communicate ocean science out to audiences, in this case, school groups, but also families, and in COVID times, to have access, and being given a very visceral experience to feel and see and learn about the ocean intimately is really exciting and needed. So hundreds of examples. I encourage to see those reports, but thanks for a great question.
All right. Thank you, Diz. All right. Last but certainly not least, and the one person we had to drag out of bed at an ungodly hour out in Victoria, Sonia Batten, is going to talk to us a little about international linkages and the decade. Take it away, Sonia.
Thank you, Paul. So yes, I'm the PICES Executive Secretary, and for anybody who's interested in acronyms, you may be wondering why PICES stands for the North Pacific Marine Science Organization. But in actual fact, the PICES stands for Pacific ICES, and ICES is a much older organization based in the North Atlantic, and so we took our name from them, really. So the North Pacific Marine Science Organization is an intergovernmental organization, and it's made up of the 6 countries that surround the North Pacific Rim. So China, Korea, Russia, the USA, Canada, and Japan. And the Secretariat is hosted here in British Columbia in the southern part of Vancouver Island in Sydney, and it's hosted by Fisheries and Oceans Canada. PICES doesn't have a regulatory or a formal advisory role towards governments, unlike some other treaty organizations or regional fisheries management organizations. Instead, what we aim to do is to promote scientific understanding through cooperation and by encouraging the blending of government scientists and academic scientists from a variety of disciplines, in fact, from ocean climate scientists right up through to whales and seabirds and anything in between. So what the organization tries to do is synthesize and disseminate knowledge as much as possible, promoting science that's directed towards an identified need. And the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development is a great example of identified needs that society has. So all of the things that we value in the ocean, from the food we eat to the fascinating biodiversity, a clean, safe place for us to relax and enjoy our vacation times, All of those things, even including perhaps a sink for the excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, all of those things are underpinned by scientific understanding of how ocean ecosystems have already responded or may continue to respond to regional and global events. So science organizations are therefore absolutely crucial to the tagline of the UN decade, the science we need for the ocean we want. So by spanning an entire ocean basin, an organization like PICES can bring into the process a wide variety of experiences. So there are local case studies, for example, related to aquaculture, and there are different approaches to aquaculture in different countries and different regions. And also to the responses of the marine system to unusual climate events, whether that's something as dramatic as a tsunami or unusual heat or sea ice loss, things like that. So all of those things are present in the PICES region. And we can also make comparisons of events, perhaps related to something like harmful algal blooms that occur in all of the regions of the North Pacific. We can bring scientists together to compare those experiences. So having a variety of perspectives really helps scaling up from the sort of more local issues to the global concerns that the UN decade is aiming for. I now don't have any control over my slides since the restart. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So although this looks like a complicated diagram, the PICES structure is essentially quite straightforward. There's a governing council made up of national delegates from each of the member countries that provides the oversight and governance. And then underneath that, we have the Secretariat to facilitate and provide support. And then two permanent committees. One is concerned with administration, and then one is concerned with delivering the science of PICES. So that's the Science Board. It sets the science priorities. And under the Science Board, we have a variety of thematic expert groups, about 20 to 30 of them at any one time, which conduct the science that PICES is doing. And they have a variety of lifespans from just 1 year up to maybe a decade or more for the science program. And those lifespans are sort of more targeted for the issue that they're addressing. So this graphic that I've got here looks complicated. I hope you can at least read some of the text on it. But what it does basically, it's taken from our overarching science program, and it maps the current expert groups that we have onto the interlinked systems that make up the social, ecological, environmental systems of the North Pacific. So we have the climate system, the human system, processes, and then on those, we have some of those processes like physical, climate, human interactions. And then we have the expert groups. And you don't really need to worry about the short form of the expert groups, but some of them might be advisory panels on marine mammals. Some of them might be looking at mesoscale processes in the ocean and so on. So they have a focus. But it isn't much of a jump to see that many of these processes and goals closely match the goals of the UN decade. So in other words, PICES is already working towards a regional understanding as far as the North Pacific is concerned of what the decade is striving to do globally. And that shouldn't be a surprise because we've arrived at the UN decade as the end of a long process of momentum of figuring out what science should be doing, what we need to be doing for our oceans. So the structure of PICES automatically builds in collaboration and diversity. Each expert group has a membership from each of the countries. So we already bring in cultural diversity. And PICES has always been a very big proponent of building capacity in younger scientists and bringing the next generation on. So again, that's a real target of the UN decade and something that will certainly be providing encouragement to us to intensify that inclusion of early career scientists. And the next slide, please. So international organizations like PICES follow a distributed funding model. There isn't a large pot of money. Instead, there's many smaller ones that are contributed by each of the different countries that make up the organization. And we can remain optimistic that someone's going to come along with a huge pot of money for the UN decade. But the reality is that it's more likely that most of the Ocean Decade activities are going to be achieved following a distributed model too. Not one large pot of money, but instead support and funding coming from a variety of sources that have to be brought together. So in other words, it's the idea of the decade that brings everybody together, and that's the inspiring thing, that we can work together to achieve something greater. But the support is going to come from a variety of places. And so an efficient way to try and address the challenges of the decade is to build on our existing infrastructure as much as possible. So targeting things that we are planning to do to focus on achieving some of those decade goals. And I've got here some examples from PICES. So the first thing we need to do is to bring in new partners to some of our expert groups. And I've just got an example here of ICES, but there are many others, both in the Pacific and regionally and globally, that we can bring in to help us deliver some of these things. And if you can click next. One of the things PICES does is host symposia. Some of these are regional, but many of them are actually completely international. I've got two examples here: Effects of Climate Change on the World's Oceans, which is a series of symposia held every 5 years. The last one was in 2018. And then coming up early in 2022, well, we're still optimistic that this will be held as an actual in-person event. So that's what we're working on at the moment. Is a conference on small pelagic fish, and that the theme of that conference is really focused on one of the UN Decade Goals, sustainable management of those small pelagic fish resources, which so many countries rely on. And if you can click next. And we produce special publications that are linked to a particular theme. Some of these are produced in-house, some of these are special issues of scientific journals, but joint publications bringing in scientific expertise from a variety of sources is one of the main strengths of the organization. And next. And then summer schools. We usually host 1 or 2 summer schools every year with training, bringing people from not just North Pacific countries, but from other parts of the world too, to receive training and education from some of the PICES scientists on specific goals. This is one from a few years ago held in Asia. But those capacity building activities are something that's actually suffered the most from the effects of the pandemic, but something that we will be maintaining as we go on. So these are just some of the activities that PICES already undertakes, and by focusing them on goals and priorities and ideas that emerge over the course of the decade. So most of these things are not set in place yet. We'll be adapting what we do as themes and ideas come out from the decade work. But we can help PICES can help individual nations, particularly Canada, to achieve the goals that the decade is aiming for. And that's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Sonia. Much appreciated. I'll start off with a very quick question for you, and that's thinking about, you obviously know Canada has priorities, PICES has priorities going into the decade, or will. How can the different groups help each other out? So in other words, how do you map what PICES prioritizes versus what perhaps Canada might prioritize?
Well, what PICES prioritizes is basically the science that our member nations, want to do. So an identified need, and the need has to be bigger than just one country. But I think that that's true for most of the decade goals. They really do address things that the whole of the world is trying to achieve. So there's always more than one player that wants to know the answers. So our science is driven from the bottom. It's driven by the members. So if people bring to the table something that they're strongly interested in, and then that's what PICES endeavors to try and make happen.
Great, thank you. We've fallen a little bit behind in the schedule, but we do have about 7 or 8 minutes for questions. We have one here for Philippe. A 2020 study found that of 246 investigators in ArcticNet, 21% were women, despite more than half of master's and PhD students being women. The UN Decade has, for one of its priorities, increasing gender equity. What is ArcticNet doing to try to address the leaky pipeline?
If I can answer, that's an easy question. Already the new version of ArcticNet, when you look at the principal investigator, 54% of the project are led by women presently, and 3 of the project are led by Inuit people. So there's already a shift. When we look at student, and I cannot share my screen, but I got a new, I would say, chart of EDI. This is what we're doing also presently. We got through an EDI process, a full one, so we really want to change the approach of ArcticNet. Since the last 2 years now, we're increasing the number of women Inuit at every level. We create also 2 new, I would say, indigenous committee to evaluate the different, I would say, level of the program and project to be sure that everything is done on a EDI level, equity, diversity, and inclusion as much as possible. So there's a huge shift. For example, now I'm the only man in the ArcticNet Secretariat and Direction out of 13 people. So it's even now the balance switched quite a lot. And one of the report was published, I think, this year. There was a huge mistake because the 2 names were name of woman, but they were translated as male, which was not the case. Some of them it's so, and that was a mistake. But anyway, also the board of directors, it's in a renewal phase. Now 60% are women and more than half are also indigenous people. So there's a huge change from the older version of ArcticNet to this new, we like to call it ArcticNet 2.0. So definitely we're working quite hard to get this balance now.
Great, thank you, Phil. Here's a question for Catherine. This could be a loaded one, but maybe there's a simple answer. Can you comment on current issues in Nova Scotia, not in terms of rights or validity of fishing activity, but in terms of shared resource sustainability responsibilities? How can this be kept as part of the discussion in times of crises?
Well, I certainly can see that it's been a very hot topic all the fall. Like you've all heard about the events that have happened in the Mi'kmaq territory in Nova Scotia related to the fisheries of lobster. So maybe for those who are not, I'm not an expert, but for those who may not know about it, it's because there was a lot of conflict between the native Mi'kmaq fishermen of Nova Scotia who just wanted to actually fish the lobster according to their traditional rights. However, it was not allowed commercially, so the commercial non-native fishermen they had strong reaction, and we had fires and conflicts. And I think a lot of it is due to a lack of communication and a lack of understanding. So there needs to be a greater awareness in that area, I think, of the country about the indigenous rights. But recently, you may also have heard the news that Clearwater was acquired in majority by the Mi'kmaq First Nations. So there is a lot going on in that area of the country at the moment. But what I can say is that now, if they have actually most of the fishing right and fishing quota in the area, of course, the Mi'kmaq nations are in a good position to make do a sustainable fishery and also work. I think we all need to work together. What I can say is that there needs to be a lot of communication and collaborative efforts to raise the awareness of the people about the indigenous rights, but also it needs to be done in a way that will be sustainable, and so that we don't overharvest. Of course, in no way that nobody wants to overharvest the lobster, but in the same time, the rights are there to be respected. So it's a very hot issue. But what I can say is that the nations here in Quebec have showed their support to the Mi'kmaq nations in Nova Scotia, and I think it's important to respect each other, and violence is never an answer. So we need to talk more, and I'm not sure if I'm answering the question right, but it's a sensitive issue. But I think that we need to open a better dialogue between the nations and the non-native fishermen for a greater understanding and maybe collaboration as well. But the rights recognition, of course, needs to come first.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. We are almost out of time, but I see another question here that maybe I'll throw this one to Sonia, since these may be similar issues that PICES faces. Can you provide comment on whether you feel the decade of ocean science will be impacted by COVID in a minor or major way, at least early views based on the current situation? Thinking about impacts associated with global government expenditures on public health, particularly in less affluent nations.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be impacts, and some of those we really will have to wait and see what those are as this unfolds. I mean, for most of us engaged in marine science, it's made us have to think about the way that we're doing our science. And I think some of those things will change for the positive. We're getting more used to working in this way, and that has a benefit in terms of carbon impact. We're having less physical meetings. We're not expending so much carbon. We're missing the face-to-face connections that can, particularly in an organization like PICES, where you need to build trust between different cultures to be able to work together effectively. And that's definitely harder to do when you can't sit in a room together and develop those relationships. So there will be some things that that are impacted for sure, and certainly nations with limited resources, financial resources, are going to have to put that focus towards improving the lives of their citizens following COVID, rather than to perhaps some more aspirational goals of the decade. But I think we'll just have to see how that plays out. I remain optimistic that we'll get over this pandemic and things will be back to normal, or a new normal, before too long.
Great, thank you, Sonia. I think Big Brother may shut us down in 4.5 minutes, so I'd like to do our two questions, our two poll questions first. So if we could put up the first of those, and if we have extra time at the end, we'll see if we have any more questions. Okay, so the question is, to what extent should the Canadian ocean community engage in the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development? This question may look familiar because we put it up at the beginning, but we're wondering if people's opinions have changed as a result of today's discussion. So let's give you 30 seconds to think about that one and see what you come up with. I think we're about to get the result, and looks like we've all jumped a little bit more towards the first choice, which is engage to the full extent possible. So it sounds like our panel has been successful in convincing our audience that that this is the way we ought to go, to jump in as fully as we can, again, given various constraints. All right, thank you. Our next question, if we can put up poll number 3. What is the primary consideration that should be at the forefront of the Canadian ocean community's mind as we prepare for the decade? And so you see you have a bunch of choices there. And so we'll give you 30 seconds to have a scan through those and decide what you like. The suspense is growing. Here it comes. Wait for it. Pretty even split. It looks like there's a little bit of a leaning towards engaging Indigenous communities, but also strong support on ocean literacy and enhanced collaboration. Modest request on increased funding, and not so sure on engaging early career professionals. Okay. Transdisciplinary, there's some good support for that, and not a whole lot on advancing efforts in ocean science and technology. Well, okay. Well, at this point, again, I don't know if Big Brother's going to shut us down, but I want to thank all of our panelists for your contributions, which were very helpful and certainly helped to build the discussion. I would ask everybody to do the post-session survey that will appear just after we shut down. And now I'm going to have a quick look and see if we have any new questions. Can you tell me how many people are responding to the questions? I don't actually know. It's a good question, and I'll see if our technical colleagues have anything to add on that. The one place we can tell, I think, don't have the info. Okay. The one place we might be able to find that is in the number of people. There's 17 participants in this session. And I don't think any of us can vote, the panelists, so that is a small sample size. I think what it means is we have basically 11 people voting, but I'm not certain of that. I don't fully trust that display. So maybe 8 seconds left. Again, thank you all, and thank you to Andrea White from DFO, who has helped to bring us all together and organize us to make this session successful. Thanks, everybody, and thanks to the Canadian Science Policy Conference. Oh, they're not shutting us down. I think they will in a few minutes, but I think that's a good place to end. All right. Take care, everybody, and stay well, and I hope to see all of you face-to-face someday soon. Bye-bye.
Many thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Bye-bye.
Paul, thanks, everyone.